The iron gates of the Blackwood Estate didn't just keep people out, they kept a ghost in. I stood in the pouring rain, clutching a letter of recommendation that felt more like a death warrant. I was the new archivist, hired to organize the library of a man the world had forgotten. Randy Blackwood was once the titan of the city, a man with a golden touch and a laugh that reached the rafters. That was before the accident, before he buried his wife and daughter and turned his back on the sun. When the massive oak door creaked open, I didn't see a titan. I saw a shadow. Randy stood in the dim foyer, his hair too long, his beard unkempt, and eyes that looked like they hadn't seen a reason to sparkle in a decade. "You're late, Alice," he said, his voice a dry rasp that sent a shiver down my spine. "The storm slowed the train, Mr. Blackwood. I'm sorry." He didn't take my coat. He didn't offer me tea. He simply turned and walked toward the back of the house. "The library is through the double doors. You have your own quarters in the west wing. Do not enter my study. Do not speak to me unless it is about the catalog. And most importantly, do not pity me. Pity is for the weak, and I am simply finished." I watched him go, the weight of his misery pressing down on me like the humid air before a strike of lightning. I had come here for a job, but as I looked at the dust-covered portraits of a happy family on the wall, I realized I had walked into a mausoleum. Randy Blackwood hadn't just sworn he'd never love again, he had sworn to stop living entirely. And for some reason, looking at his retreating back, I felt a spark of stubborn defiance. He wanted to be a ghost. Fine. But I wasn't going to let him haunt me. The library was a graveyard of stories. Thousands of books, their leather spines cracked and gray with neglect, stood as silent witnesses to Randy's isolation. For 3 days, I didn't see him. I only heard him, the heavy thud of his boots in the hallway at midnight, the clink of a glass against a coaster in the room next to mine. On the 4th day, I found him standing on a rolling ladder, reaching for a book on the highest shelf. He looked frail, yet there was a raw strength in his movements that surprised me. Suddenly, the ladder slipped on the polished floor. "Randy," I screamed, dropping a stack of papers and rushing toward him. I caught his arm just as he regained his balance. For a moment, we were chest to chest, the scent of cedar and old paper swirling between us. His skin was burning hot against my palms. He looked down at me, his eyes wide with a shock that quickly turned to ice. "I told you not to speak to me," he growled, ripping his arm away. "And I'm telling you that you almost broke your neck. Is that the plan? To die in a room full of dead things?" He climbed down, his movements jerky. He stepped into my personal space, his height used as a weapon to intimidate. "What I do with my life, or what's left of it, is none of your concern, Alice. You are here to sort paper, not to sort me." "Then stop making it so hard to watch," I countered, my heart hammering. He looked like he wanted to roar, but instead he just turned and fled. But he left the book behind. I picked it up. It was a collection of poetry, and inside the front cover, a dried rose fell out. He wasn't just grieving, he was obsessing. He was keeping the wound open on purpose, and I realized then that the only way to save him was to make him angry enough to remember what it felt like to be alive. The anger didn't last. It was replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence that lasted another week. I focused on my work, but I started leaving the curtains open in the library, letting the morning sun bleach the gloom. I brought fresh wildflowers from the garden into the dining hall. I was reclaiming the house, inch by inch. One night, the power failed during a thunderstorm. I was navigating the hallway with a single candle when I heard a sound from the study. It was a sob, ragged, deep, and full of a pain so intense it made my own throat ache. I pushed the door open. Randy was slumped over his desk, surrounded by old home movies playing on a battery-operated projector. The flickering light showed a younger Randy, laughing as he swung a toddler in the air. "Randy," I whispered. He didn't look up. She was 3, Alice. She had just learned to say my name without a lisp. And in one heartbeat, on a wet road, they were gone. I wasn't there. I was at a board meeting. I was making money while they were dying. I walked over and put my hand on his shoulder. This time, he didn't pull away. He leaned into my touch, his forehead resting against my stomach. "It wasn't your fault," I said softly. "I swore to them," he choked out. "I swore I'd never let anyone else in, because if I love again, I'm betraying them. If I'm happy, I'm forgetting the price they paid. Love isn't a zero-sum game, Randy. Loving someone else doesn't take away the love you had for them. It just means you've finally decided to stop punished yourself for being the one who survived. He looked up at me, the candlelight reflecting in the tears on his cheeks. For the first time, he didn't look like a ghost. He looked like a man who was drowning and had finally seen a lifeboat. He reached up, his hand trembling as he touched my hair. "Why are you doing this, Alice? Why do you care?" "Because," I whispered, "I think I've been waiting for someone like you my whole life." The morning after the storm, the house felt different. Randy came down for breakfast. He had shaved. He wore a sweater that wasn't gray or black. We didn't talk about the night before, but the air between us was no longer thick with ice. It was electric. "I'm going into town," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Do you need anything for the library?" "Supplies for the binding, and maybe some new seeds for the garden." He nodded and left, but he returned with more than just seeds. He brought a box of my favorite pastries from the bakery in town and a silk scarf the color of the sunset. It was a peace offering. It was a bridge. We started spending our evenings in the library together. He would read while I worked, and sometimes he would tell me stories about the books. He was brilliant, his mind a treasure trove of history and philosophy. I found myself looking forward to his footsteps. I found myself dressing a little nicer, hopping to see that flicker of interest in his wintry eyes. But the ghost of his past wasn't gone. One afternoon, a lawyer arrived at the house. He was there to finalize the sale of Randy's former company, the last link to his old life. As Randy signed the papers, I saw the mask slip back on. The fear of moving on was warring with the desire to stay in the light. "Is this what you want?" I asked after the lawyer left. "It has to be," he said, his voice flat. "If I sell it, there's nothing left to go back to. It's just here and you." Is here and me so bad? He walked over to me, his presence overwhelming in the small space of the archives. He took my face in his hands, his thumbs tracing my jawline. "It's the most terrifying thing I've ever faced, Alice, because for the first time in 5 years, I want to live. And I'm terrified that if I do, the world will take you away too." The fear didn't stop him from leaning in. When Randy kissed me, it wasn't the tentative kiss of a man who was unsure. It was the desperate, starving kiss of a man who had been wandering in a desert for 5 years. It tasted like grief turning into hope, like winter turning into spring. We moved to his bedroom, the room he had kept like a shrine to his past. But as we crossed the threshold, he didn't look at the photos on the nightstand. He looked at me. He stripped away the layers of his armor, the heavy sweaters, the guarded expressions, and showed me the man underneath. Making love to Randy was an act of healing. It was slow, intense, and deeply emotional. Every touch felt like a question, and every response was an answer. He explored my body with a reverence that made me feel like the most precious thing on earth. He whispered things in the dark, promises he was finally brave enough to make, fears he was finally brave enough to voice. In the quiet hours of the morning, as I lay with my head on his chest, I felt the steady, strong beat of his heart. The man who swore he'd never love again was holding me like he'd never let me go. "Alice," he whispered, his voice thick with sleep and something else, something like joy. I think I'm breaking my vow." "Good," I murmured, pressing a kiss to his collarbone. It was a stupid vow anyway. But as I drifted back to sleep, the phone on his nightstand began to glow. A message from an unknown number. "I know why you're really there, Alice. Does Randy know his new love is a lie?" My heart stopped. My past, the one I had tried so hard to leave behind, had finally found the gates of the Blackwood Estate. I couldn't breathe. I looked at Randy's sleeping face, so peaceful for the first time, and felt like a monster. The message was from Mark, my ex-fiancé, the man who had ruined my career and sent me fleeing into the mountains to take this job. He was a gambler, a cheat, and he wanted the Blackwood fortune. I spent the next day jumping at every shadow. Randy noticed, of course. He was too observant to miss the way my hands shook when I poured the tea. "What is it, Alice? What happened?" "Nothing, just a bad dream." "You can tell me anything," he said, taking my hand. We're in this together now. But how could I tell him? How could I tell a man who had just started to trust again that the woman he loved had a secret that could destroy his peace? Mark called that afternoon. I took it in the garden, hidden behind the rose bushes. What do you want, Mark? 500,000, Alice. Just a small finder's fee for keeping my mouth shut about your little scandal at the university. If I tell Randy you were fired for stealing rare manuscripts, he'll kick you out before you can pack your bags. A man like him, he hates thieves. I didn't steal them. You planted them in my bag to pay off your debts. Doesn't matter what the truth is, Mark sneered. It matters what Randy believes. You have 48 hours. I hung up, my world spinning. I looked back at the house, at the man standing on the balcony watching me with a smile. I had finally brought him back to life, and now my past was going to kill him all over again. I tried to find the money. I looked through my meager savings, but it was nothing compared to what Mark wanted. I considered telling Randy the truth, but the fear of seeing that cold, wintry look return to his eyes was too much to bear. The 48 hours were up. Mark didn't wait. He showed up at the gate, demanding to see Mr. Blackwood. I met him there, my heart in my throat. Leave, Mark, please. I'll get you the money, just give me more time. Time's up, sweetheart. He pushed past me, walking toward the front door. Randy was standing there, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked like the Titan again, formidable and dangerous. Can I help you? He asked, his voice low and threatening. Actually, Randy, I'm here to help you, Mark said with a wicked grin. Did Alice tell you why she's really here? Did she tell you she's a disgraced thief who uses her charms to get close to wealthy men in mourning? I felt the ground fall away. I looked at Randy, expecting the ice. I expecting the roar. Instead, Randy didn't even look at Mark. He kept his eyes on me. Is this true, Alice? Were you fired from the university? Yes, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. But Randy, I didn't steal. I know you didn't, Randy interrupted, his voice surprisingly gentle. He looked back at Mark. I did my research before I hired her, you pathetic worm. I know exactly what you did to her. I know about the police reports you managed to suppress. And I know you're trespassing. Randy stepped forward, and for a second I thought he was going to hit him. Instead, he pulled a phone from his pocket. The police are already on their way, and so is my legal team. We're filing a restraining order and a suit for extortion. Get off my property before I decide to handle this the old-fashioned way. Mark fled, his tail between his legs, but the silence that followed was even heavier. We walked back into the house, and Randy went straight to the library. He sat in his usual chair, but he didn't pick up a book. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. I was ashamed, and I was afraid you'd think I was only here for the money, like Mark said. Randy sighed, a long, weary sound. Alice, I spent 5 years living in a lie. I thought I was protecting myself by being alone, but the truth is I was just hiding. I know what it's like to have people assume the worst of you, but I also know what you've done for me. You didn't just organize my books, you organized my heart. You really knew. I knew you were in trouble. I didn't know the specifics until Mark started calling the estate office. My security team tracked him down days ago. I was just waiting to see if you'd trust me enough to tell me. He looked at me, a flicker of pain in his eyes. That's the one thing I still struggle with, Alice, trust. I'm so used to things breaking. I'm not going to break, Randy, and I'm not going to leave. I knelt between his knees, resting my head on his lap. He stroked my hair, his touch grounding me. We had survived the ghost of his past and the shadow of mine. But the biggest hurdle was still ahead, the anniversary. The day his world had ended 5 years ago was tomorrow. The house was silent on the morning of the anniversary. Randy didn't come down for breakfast. He didn't come down for lunch. I found him in the garden, standing by a small stone bench he had built years ago. He was holding 3 roses, 1 red, 2 white. I used to spend this day in the dark, he said without turning around. I'd drink until I couldn't remember their names. I'd scream at the walls until my throat was raw. And today, he turned to me, his face pale but resolute. Today, I want to go to the cemetery, and I want you to come with me." It was a long drive, and the silence in the car was sacred. When we arrived at the gravesite, Randy stood there for a long time, his eyes closed. He laid the roses down, his lips moving in a silent prayer. Then he turned to me and took my hand. "I told them about you," he whispered. "I told them that I'm going to try. I'm going to try to be the man they loved, even if they aren't here to see it. And I told them that I've found someone who makes the world feel a little less like a graveyard." We walked back to the car, and for the first time, he didn't look back. He looked forward. The weight that had been on his shoulders for 5 years seemed to have lifted, replaced by a quiet strength. He had finally honored his past by choosing a future. 1 year later. The Blackwood Estate was no longer a mausoleum. The library was full of light, and the garden was blooming with the flowers we had planted together. Randy was back at the helm of a new company, one focused on charitable works and community building. He was a titan again, but a titan with a heart. We were standing on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in those same shades of purple and gold that Randy had once brought me in a scarf. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, pulling me into the warmth of his chest. "You're thinking again," he murmured into my ear. "Just thinking about how different life is. How lucky I am that I missed that train because of the storm." "I'm the lucky one, Alice. I swore I'd never love again. I thought it was the ultimate tribute to what I'd lost. But you taught me that the best way to honor the people we've lost is to live the life they can't." He turned me around, his eyes shining with a deep, unwavering love. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. Inside was a ring, a vintage sapphire that looked like a piece of the winter sky he had finally left behind. "Alice Thorne, you saved a man who didn't want to be saved. You loved a man who didn't think he was lovable. Will you stay, not just as my archivist, but as my wife, forever?" "Yes," I whispered, the word a promise and a celebration all at once. 1,000 times yes. As he slipped the ring onto my finger and pulled me into a kiss, I realized that our story wasn't a tragedy after all. It was a triumph. The man who swore he'd never love again had finally found the one thing that was stronger than grief. He had found home.